That's my baby girl right there. Ooh, she with her friends. I'm a dog, I ain't shit. I'ma wind up hitting her friends. Bad guy, outlaw. Ooh, I'm like Pac, but I ain't die after the second time I got shot.
What's good? This is your boy Tico Tren, and this video is going to be about. This is your boy Tico Tren, aka the Internal Sadist. This video is going to be about single mothers versus the dating market. I've actually done a video on this, but it was like a while ago on my old channel. But it's pretty much going to be a 2.0 version of it, I guess you could say. Um, the thing about single mothers in the dating market in this day and age, or versus the dating market in this day and age, is that they tend to think that they have this advantage in the dating market because they're reliving their glory days. The irony to that is, unfortunately, in this current dating market, there's this thing called risk assessment analysis, and most men aren't willing to take chances on women who still have young children at home. Typically, is how it works. The sad part about that is when it actually goes down, they feel slighted, or they feel like they're being robbed by men for all intents and purposes, because men aren't really capitulating to what they would like them to do, or what they would love them to be for all intents and purposes in relationships. The sad part about that is men are only willing to do what they believe necessary, or what they believe is within their realm or scope of possibilities for all intents and purposes. So a man is not going to really be taking chances on a woman who is a net deficit for all intents and purposes. And what I mean by net deficit is a woman that's pretty much going to be debt from day one to the last day for all intents and purposes. And the sad part about that is there's a lot of women that are like this that aren't even single mothers. They're like college students for all intents and purposes. Like there's a lot of college women that graduated from college and got these nice degrees, but don't have the right job to pay them off, or have all these very expensive degrees, and they don't have the money, or they don't have the job career, or the career prospects to say, damn, to actually pay off their debt. Which leads to a lot of debt for their future significant other or husband for all intents and purposes. Because the sad part about that, when you marry a woman, you take on her debt, which is typically how it works. When you marry a woman, you take on her debt, which is sad. Even if you get a divorce from her, unless you have some type of prenup where you don't have to pay her debt, you're literally responsible for her debt even after divorce for all intents and purposes, which is sad. The sad part about that is another thing that women tend to fall into or fail to realize when it comes to things like this is that they think and believe that because they get wet for men who are out in public with their children, that men should be wet for them, or have a hard on for them being out in public with their children. Is typically how it works. Because the sad part about that is a man's more likely to get attention from women if he's out and about with his children, unlike a woman when she's out and about with her children. The sad part about that is no matter what a man's wearing, he's more likely to get attention with his children out in public. The problem with women is it all depends on what they're wearing, that they'll actually get attention with their children out in public. Like a good example of this is you'll notice that a lot of women tend to wear thongs, and they'll tend to wear like low rising jeans or hip huggers or something along the lines of that come up barely past their hips. So when they bend over or stoop down, you literally can see their thongs and shit like that for all intents and purposes. So you'll see women doing that quite often for all intents and purposes. Which you also see is women that will do stupid stuff like wear very 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 low V necks, or like the V neck comes down very very low, to get attention also in public. And this is typically how a lot of women get attention from men in public for all intents and purposes, because at the end of the day, they're less likely to get attention than a man is with a child. So women in a relationship typically would do stuff like wear like the hip hugger jeans with the thongs, or they'll wear the very very low going V neck for all intents and purposes, so they can show off more cleavage, or they'll wear like the push up bra that pops their breasts up out of the top of a fucking turtleneck for all intents and purposes, so they can get attention. Whereas a man with his child, he just gets attention for the fact that he's a man with his child, and it just looks sexy to women. The sad part about that, on the flip side, women believe the reason why women are always pushing this narrative about single mothers and dating single mothers is, on the flip side, they believe, because this is what they find attractive, that men should find this attractive, when in fact this is not what men find attractive. Men don't find single mothers attractive unless they got children out the house. And then on top of that, that's even a hit or miss when it comes down to it, for the fact that when women have children out of the house, that usually means that that woman can't have children anymore any damn way for all intents and purposes. So therefore, she's not a valuable mate for all intents and purposes. So this is what this shit actually comes down to when it comes to it. Because at the end of the day, what a lot of women fail to realize when it comes to men want their own children. So if you can't give them their own children, they're not going to want you for all intents and purposes. It's sad, but it's the reality of the day. This is why this video is called "Single Mothers versus the Dating Market." The sad part about that is single mothers believe all this great stuff, yeah, but at the end of the day, what they get and what they want are what they want and what they're going to get is two totally different things. Because this is why they always push these narratives and always have these op-eds and always have these magazine stories about how great it is to date a single mother, or 90 reasons why it's great to date a single mother, 50 reasons why it's great to date a single mother, 20 great reasons why it's great to date a single mother, why single mothers are great. The list goes on all these damn op-eds and articles for all intents and purposes, and it gets like a little bit ridiculous and redundant. It's basically the thing about they push single motherhood so hard. They push it about as hard as they try to push fat acceptance for all intents and purposes. There's a difference between accepting something and forcing something down somebody's throat. Typically, what they do is they try to force it down your throat. There's a difference between accepting it and having it forced down your throat. 9 times out of 10, if you have it forced down your throat, you're going to resent it and you're probably going to lash out and fight back for all intents and purposes. If you're it's one thing to accept something. Everybody accepts something for all intents and purposes. However, just because we accept it, that don't mean we have to actually go along with it and or want to date it and or want to be in a relationship with it. For all intents and purposes, is typically how that works. The sad part about that is women think because this is what they like. And the sad part about that, this is what I find funny about the whole entire fat acceptance thing. It's fine to make men want to accept fat women. However, there's no woman out there that's going to accept a fat guy for all intents and purposes. Let's just keep it 100. Fat acceptance only works one way. It's a one-way street when it comes to fat acceptance. Fat acceptance only applies to women. It never applies to men. So at the end of the day, a woman doesn't have to accept the fat guy, but men have to accept the fat woman. It's typically how that works. Same thing goes for women with single mothers for all intents and purposes. Women don't have to accept men who are single fathers, but men have to accept women who are single mothers. It's typically how that works. So basically, women don't want to have to be clean up woman, but they want you to be cleaned up man for all intents and purposes, which is sad. And the sad part about that is how that works is usually that's typically the dynamic that pretty much messes up the whole entire thing when it comes to single motherhood or, the dating market for single mothers for all intents and purposes. So the first thing you got is, women believing, oh, well, no, women try to manipulate the opposite sex into wanting to date them for all intents and purposes by the choice of clothing that they wear. That's the first thing you got out there. The second thing you got out there is women believe or project their feelings onto when they see a single man in public. that this is how men should see single mothers for all intents and purposes, when in fact they don't. Which brings me to my next point of three, which is usually single mothers are it's basically, I talked about this at the beginning of the stream, and I basically said single mothers are a risk assessment and are a net deficit for all intents and purposes. And the sad part about that, they don't see it that way, but they really are that way. And what I mean by that is the thing that women won't accept about being single mothers is the simple fact that it sounds good in theory to be a single mother, but up until you actually got to actually when you want to get back out there on a horse and go date again, then all of a sudden it doesn't really seem like it's great to be a single mother for all intents and purposes. Because at the end of the day, what happens with this is what happens with this is you run into the problem of he has to pay for your children. I mean, it's fine that it's a package deal and all, but the sad part about that, that's the problem. It's a package deal. The problem with the package deal is he has to financially back the children or financially drop money on the children, but he has no rights in how they're raised. He has no say or rights in how they're raised. This is typically why a lot of men avoid single mothers for all intents purposes, because at the end of the day, all he's pretty much there for is to be a wallet or an ATM for you and your children. That's typically all it is. He's there to be a wallet and ATM for your children, and and be be a sex slave at some point whenever he gets it for all intents and purposes. That's typically how that works. So he's basically to be your boy. He's basically there to be your boy toy and your ATM for you and your children. That's all he's there for. He's not really there for anything else. And he doesn't have any say so, or he doesn't have any say in how the children are raised or what they're doing and or their discipline. And this is typically why men opt out on dating single mothers. Because the sad part about that is a man doesn't want to have to pay for something that a man doesn't want to have to basically pay for something that he can't discipline and or say anything to and or be an actual parent to and or want to raise that actual child. This is typically why a lot of men opt out on single mothers. So I'm gonna go back and list the first. The first one is basically single mothers have this habit of projecting how they see men with children onto men, and they believe this is how men should see them because this is how they see men with children. And the sad part about that is that's not how men see single mothers, just like women see single fathers. Just because you get wet because you see a single father with his child doesn't mean a man's going to get hard because he sees a single mother with his child. So typically what single mothers do, which is actually part one, is they'll dress they'll dress a little bit revealing. So what will happen with single mothers? They'll typically wear like very very low V cut shirts, so they can show off some cleavage, so they can be appealing to men, and or they'll wear the waist huggers with thongs. So anytime they stand up or anytime their shirt rises, you basically see their thong. Or anytime they stoop down, you'll see their thong. Or anytime they bend over or anything like that, you'll see their thong. And this is typically what women do to try to get attention from men when they're single mothers. It's kind of like that one meme that's floating around the internet when you're a single mom, but you desperate. Certainly what it says, and it's actually pretty funny. You should definitely go check out that meme. Or when you're a desperate mom, but you really trying to get some D. When you're a single mom, but you're trying to get some D. It's typically how it is, and that's pretty much sad. That's the sad reality of single mothers. And the third thing I just mentioned is children. Men don't want to. Men don't want to feel like they have to. Men are upset with women for the fact that they don't want to have to pay for a child that's a net deficit to raising, when in fact they don't have any say so, or they don't have any rights of discipline, and or they can't say much about the child messing up, or they can't be an actual parent to the child. Their job is to basically be the ATM to the child for all intents and purposes. And this is typically why a lot of single men would never date single mothers, for the fact that they don't want to just be a wallet. They want to actually be a part of this child's life. They want to actually be a part and they want to take part in raising this child. And if they can't do that, they don't want to put money in something that they have no control over or have no say so in. It'd be like saying, you should give me this $500. Don't worry where I'm going to spend it at. Just trust me. That's typically what you're doing when it comes to children. Only it's way more than $500. It tends to be upwards of thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on how far when you actually walked into that relationship and how far the child has progressed in that how far you've came along with the child in that relationship for all intents and purposes. So it can be anywhere between thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars, or hundreds of thousands of dollars for all intents and purposes. And that's the sad part about it. And women don't seem to understand this, and they want to get upset with men because they don't want to date them, pretty much because they're a net deficit. Because at that point in time, all a man is in that relationship is a wallet or an ATM and a sex toy. Whenever she wants to let off whenever she wants to let off some steam, that whenever that is, for all intents and purposes. Because the sad part about that is, even if you're dating a single mother, you're probably less guaranteed. You're probably less likely going to get sex than you would if you're actually married to the woman, for all intents and purposes. If not, it's probably going to be the same as if you're married to the woman, because you're always going to play. You're always going to be your feelings and your emotions are always going to be put off for all intents and purposes, and which segues me into my fourth point on why men don't want to date single mothers. The sad part about that is, and this ties into the last point, the third point, where you're nothing more than you're nothing more than a fucking ATM in a sex toy whenever she wants you or needs you from out of the drawer for all intents and purposes, which actually ties into this fourth one, which is you're basically only there for her pleasure whenever she wants pleasure, and you're only there when she financially needs you for all intents and purposes. Is typically your role. You're only there for the wallet. You're only there to be the wallet for all intents and purposes when it comes to single mothers. That's the problem with a lot of people who date. That's the problem with a lot of men who don't want to. That's a problem with the men who date single mothers, is they end up being just a wallet. It don't matter what else is going on. Their needs is not really all that important. Their needs aren't even back burner. That'd be like an understatement. Their needs are pretty much put not even on the fucking stove. They're off in a corner some damn where in a house in a dark corner for all intents and purposes. It's typically a man's needs in a relationship with a single mother. It's like he has to put all her needs first, all her children's needs first, and his needs don't even fucking matter. His needs are null and void. As long as he's putting in money, his needs don't really count. His needs, she'll fake like she appreciates it, but the sad part about women is, when it comes down to it, is what have you done for me lately? Or what have you done for us lately? Is typically how it works. And the sad part about it is, this is typically the conundrum you're going to live in when you're dating a single mother. It's like, it doesn't matter anything you do. You could be paying for her son's fucking football stuff or hockey stuff, or basketball stuff. Well, hockey stuff is more expensive. Football stuff and hockey stuff tend to be more expensive. But you be paying for all this stuff. You're paying for all his activities, and all that shit don't matter, because at the end of the day, it's what have you done for us lately, or what have you done for her lately? Despite the fact that you're paying for a child, the fact that you're paying for a child gets swept under the rug for what have you done for her lately, for all intents and purposes. So a man really at this point becomes a wallet at this point, a pet wallet at this point. And the sad part about that is his needs really gets shelved in a corner in a dark room some damn where, and her needs are always up front, then her child's needs are always second, and his needs are never really anywhere in that whole entire grand scheme of thing. His needs are never really there. And most people would joke and say they'll come in fifth if they have pets. The sad part about that is they don't even come in any place for all intents and purposes. When you're a man dating a single mother, you come in no place. You don't get a place. You're just there to you're basically there to just financially spend money on these kids and her for all intents and purposes. And whatever you got to say doesn't matter, because you can't discipline the kids. You don't have any say-so if the kid does something wrong, and you don't have any say-so in anything else for all intents and purposes, which typically plays into a man's psyche for the fact that, why would I want to drop money on something that I can't even have no input on? Or that'd be like basically saying this: give me a $10,000. I'm going to invest in a stock. You don't need to know the stock. I'm just going to invest in a stock for you. Then a person doesn't tell you what the stock is, and they don't tell you that you're losing money, and they don't tell you that you just lost the shirt off your fucking back for all intents and purposes. The money just evaporates in the thin air like water. Water before it turns to rain for all intents and purposes. That's typically what a lot of men run into for all intents and purposes when it comes down to it in a relationship with a single mother. So that's pretty much number four. Number five typically is when a man gets into a relationship with a single mother, another problem that they tend to run into is the fact that their needs are never going to be met. Their needs will never be met. Their needs will never be met for the fact that their needs aren't important. Their needs will never be important, and their needs will never be important for the fact that she already snagged you, so you're pretty much here now. So the sad part about that is she'll make you feel important. I would say the first 2-3 months of the whole entire relationship, but then the sad part about that, when she knows she got you, your importance disappears. So you get that you get that importance for the first 2 or 3 months. You get some type of importance. You get a place in the whole entire scheme of thing for the first 2 or 3 months. The sad part about that is when it progresses on past that, you realize that you no longer have a place. You don't fit into the grand scheme of things. Only reason why you fit into the grand scheme of things, like I said on the last one, is because you're just there financially to back everybody. You're basically there to be the wallet for everybody for all intents and purposes. So whenever she fuck up financially, you're there to actually fix it financially. Whenever her child fucks up financially, you're there to fix it financially, which is sad. And the sad part about that, no man wants to be relegated to a fucking wallet in a relationship, or no man wants to be relegated unless you're a fucking simp. More power to you. No man wants to be relegated to a wallet in a relationship. The sad part about that is this is something that when women tend to seem to this is one of the many areas where women seem to always fuck up or get wrong, because they'll project all this other stuff on the men, but when it comes to a man's feelings, there's no projection on it whatsoever. It's like, well, he's here, he's a man, that's all that matters, and he's paying for me. That's typically how women think, for all intents and purposes, when it comes to a man's feelings. A man's feelings don't matter. It just doesn't matter for all intents and purposes. So his feelings, well, his feelings and anything he's going through would always be, shelved or couched in a dark room some damn where for anything she got going on in her whole entire life. Let it be her wanting to remodel the whole damn house. You don't even fucking live there, but she want to remodel her house and she needs you to pay for it. Her kid wants to, start a new activity. So not only are you paying for hockey, you're paying for karate, you're paying for soccer practice, you're paying for dance, you're paying for all this other great shit. And the sad part about that is you're getting no benefit out of this shit, because it's not like you're actually dropping her kid off at the damn soccer practice or any of them things. She's basically doing all the shit, and you basically have to hope and pray that your money's actually going towards your shit for all intents and purposes. It's typically how it works. So this is another reason why women run into a problem with finding men. Single mothers run into a problem with finding men in the dating market for all intents and purposes. And it's sad. It's really sad when it happens. But for the most part, men try to make it work. But the sad part about that is the women that they get into relationships with, they don't make it work at all, and it only works in their favor for all intents and purposes, which is pretty much an overall problem that a lot of men have with dating single mothers. Because the sad part about that, something I've always noticed about the difference between single mothers and single fathers is single fathers will always find time to actually make a date. And I said this in a video a long time ago on my old channel. The sad part about that is if you have a date with a single father, let's just say the single father may miss only 1 out of 10 of those dates for all intents and purposes when it comes to his children. Whereas a single mother, if you have 10 dates going in, a single mother will probably miss 7 out of those 10 dates for all intents and purposes. Is usually how it usually roughly goes. The sad part about that is a single mother never really gets a chance to break away for the fact that she doesn't settle her household properly like a single father would if he was in a relationship. Like a good example of that is if a single father says, "I'll meet you at 7 or 8," a woman would actually get upset for the fact that the time is not all about her. Whereas a man's not allowed to do anything like that or feel this way about being like, pushed back to a certain time, because after a certain time you tend to turn in after a certain time you tend to turn into booty call time as at a certain point. So you become booty call at some point. But the sad part about that, women don't see this when we're actually making these plans, but women are willing to actually talk about this shit when a man is pushing a woman, making dates for like 6 or 7 for all intents and purposes. And the sad part about that, women will actually usually talk about shit like this. The sad part about that is men will say, "You okay? Yes, whatever. We'll just do what you want to do for all intents and purposes," which is typically what usually happens. But the sad part about that is, when it comes down to it, a man pretty much plans his day around his child's schedule. And this is typically where men actually do better with parents, do better as parents than mothers, is for the fact that single fathers do better than single mothers for the fact that fathers have structure. So typically, usually when a man is pushing a date back to a 7 or 8 o'clock, this is typically what happens in his household if his child is like, a youngin for all intents and purposes. We'll say if his child is what, like under 7 or younger. Typically what happens is dad comes home, he gets a lot of stuff ready, he earns out the clothes, he makes sure everything's good for his child tomorrow. If they got school in the morning, he pretty much earns out their clothes, gets their lunch ready, stuff like that. He feeds them dinner, he gives them a bath, he reads them a story, then they eventually go to bed. Or you'll get a bath, they'll watch some TV, they start getting tired, he'll lay them down, he'll read them a story, and they typically go to sleep and they stay asleep. Structure. This is typically how a dad deals with his daily routine, without fail. But usually most dads have a daily routine where that's basically how they pretty much run their household for all intents and purposes, on a certain routine. Single mothers, on the other hand, they don't have that routine. They don't have that structure. So children are doing this and whatever and all this at any time of the day, any time of the night. Good example of that is sexy time. If you're having sexy time with a single mother, their children are going to conveniently be up, need some water, want to bust in a room. She ain't going to want to lock the door. And that's pretty much reason 6, or is it around 5 or 6? That's reason 5 on a lot of reasons on why men don't like to date single mothers for all intents and purposes, because when sexy time needs to go down, it's not going down because her children either are going to bust in a room because she don't want to lock her door, or he's always going to be knocking out the door, or you'll see his goofy ass, his or her goofy ass with their fingers coming from under the door like they fucking cats or dog. The cats always stick their paws under the damn door. Kids usually do that shit too when it comes to sexy time. When you're an adult, for all intents and purposes, they'll like slide their fingers under the door and be wiggling them, and they'll be outside the door talking like they really need something. So sexy time never really goes down at a single mother's house for this reason. What's up, Janky? What's up, Baron Yam? But typically, that's how this stuff actually works when it comes down to it. They run into problems like this, and then the sad part about that is if you're having sexy time at a single father's house, them children are knocked out like logs. Them children ain't getting up for shit. Unless they have a bad fucking dream, his children aren't getting up. So sexy time could go like 10, 4 rounds, 6 rounds, 12 rounds, 15 rounds, 90 round knockout for all intents and purposes in his house for all intents and purposes. And that's typically how it works. 9 times out of 10, his children are going to be in bed and stay asleep. Whereas her children, they have the run of the house and they can't really say nothing. And the sad part about that is the difference between when a woman is dating a single father and when a man is dating a single father. If a man says, "Why don't you lock the door?" she's typically going to make excuses for not wanting to lock the door, or saying, "Well, it's his house too. He deserves to, be able to just walk in." So you want your child to need therapy. Is technically what you're telling that man for all intents and purposes. So now that's another thing that man's got to pay for, because now you're trying to traumatize your kids because you have them walking in on you being spanked or slapped or choked and shit like that in the middle of a sex act. Yeah, that makes sense. Just traumatize the shit out of your kid. Let me tell you. And the sad part about that is women don't really think about shit like this when they actually do shit like this for all intents and purposes. And this is typically how this stuff plays out. And the sad part about that is If a man was to, stop sexy time with a woman, a single father was to stop sexy time at a woman, she would be mad at him for stopping sexy time for his children, or she would be mad at him, and then she wouldn't want to talk to him no more if he stopped sexy time with her. This is typically how this shit works. Because the sad part about that is the mentalities are different. If a woman stops sexy time with a man goes, okay, yeah, see, this is, I seen this coming, this, that, and the other, and I shouldn't even have tried this shit for all intents and purposes. Simply how a man thinks. When you stop sexy time with a woman, her feelings are hurt. She gets all up in her feelings and gets all emotional, and she starts thinking there's something wrong with her. So, so she could try to save face. She'll typically not want to see you, or she'll ghost you for stopping sexy time on her. For all intents and purposes, is usually how it works. So she'll typically like ghost you, or so she won't feel as though that she got slighted. So she'll typically break up with you by ghosting your ass and not wanting to talk to you for all intents and purposes. It's typically how that dynamic usually goes. So number five is basically, when it comes to sexy time, there's never no quality time. When it comes to sexy time or date night, these are really where women's parenting really fails, where they claim they shine at for all intents and purposes. And this is where single fathers actually shine in when it comes to sexy time and or date night. So this is typically the market for single mothers, and this is why single mothers always run into a wall in the market for all intents and purposes. Because at the end of the day, nobody wants to be relegated to a corner in a dark room for all intents and purposes. No man wants to be relegated to a corner in a dark room. That's one problem with single mothers. Another problem with single mothers is they lack structure, and men notice this stuff, so therefore they don't want to be involved in a household that has no structure, especially if they have no say so in that structure. Especially if they can't really, give any pointers. They're not allowed to do any of that stuff to, possibly make it better or mitigate it a lot better to make it much more smoother for the woman. They're not allowed to say anything, or they're not allowed to have any say so in that thing. And this is typically why men won't date single mothers for all intents and purposes. That's pretty much two reasons in a nutshell right there. Because when he comes down to it, he doesn't want to be relegated to some dark room, and his feelings don't really matter, and he's not placed in any form of the hierarchy or the pecking order. Because the sad part about that is, if you're a man dating a single woman, a single mother, you're typically not even going to get a place at the table. You're not even going to get a place. You're not even going to get. You're not even going to get an actual place. Let's just say a good example of that is, what I mean by that is, let's just say she has two children. We'll say she has two children and she has a pet. Okay, cool. She's going to come in first place. Her one child's going to come in second place and third place. Her dog's going to come in fourth place. You're not going to place at all. That's typically how that works. You're not going to place at all. You don't even get a place. You don't even get the fifth place for all intents and purposes when you date a single mother. So you don't even get a placement in the order or the pecking order, because you're not that important. You're not important enough to get a placement in the pecking order for all intents and purposes. It's typically how it works, and that's another reason why men don't want to date single mothers. And it's typically what it is. So, like, what you can't do is sit up here and try to shame men into dating you, when in fact, shaming a man into dating you makes a man not want to date you even more. And the sad part about that is, a lot of these times, a lot of these mothers have nervous breakdowns raising their children, and men don't really want to be around that if they're not allowed to actually put in or have any input on how they can make their life easier. And this is typically another problem that a lot of men run into when they date single mothers, is they don't have no input to possibly make her life easier, because this is how she's used to running her household in complete chaos. The sad part about that is, a man doesn't want to live in chaos. It don't matter how much shaming you use. A man likes order and structure for all intents and purposes. And if you can't provide order and structure for your children, that lets them know as a human being that you're not worth his time, because you have no order and structure for your children, which means you definitely don't have no order and structure for yourself. For all intents and purposes, is usually how that works. So that means you you don't have any order or structure for yourself, which means you don't have any standards and or anything in place to mitigate any of the problems going on in your household. So by the time it comes down to it, it's a bit late because you already had a nervous breakdown. It's typically how that works. It's sad, but it's true. Another reason why single men don't want to date single mothers, like men that don't have any children don't want to date single mothers, is the fact that psychologically, to you, it's not the fact that it's not it's basically a good example of that is everything about you is a burden for all intents and purposes. And what I mean by that is everything's a burden or baggage for all intents and purposes. The sad part about that is and women will say, well, I don't understand why men think this is a burden. It's a burden for the fact that 9 times out of 10, the father or the child is still in their lives. But the sad part about that is, despite the fact that the father or the children are still in those children's lives, you got to pick up 100% of that cost, and the father pretty much gets off scot fucking free. Think about that shit. So he's not paying for shit. You're paying for all the shit. This is a problem. If the father's still in the children's relationship, if the father still has a relationship with the children and he is in the children's life, he should have to pay for some of this shit. 9 times out of 10, if you're dating a single mother, you're going to have to pick up his tab. You're going to have to pick up her tab plus his tab for all intents and purposes. Because at the end of the day, what's not happening is he's pretty much going to get away with getting away with a lot of stuff that he doesn't have to pay for all intents and purposes. It's typically how it works. Then the sad part about that is because of baggage, he's always going to be around, and he's always going to probably give you problems and give everybody problems for the fact that it's his children and that was his baby mama. So there's always going to be baby daddy drama for all intents and purposes. And this is typically what happens with a lot of the single mothers is there's baby daddy drama for all intents and purposes. And it doesn't matter how strong a man is. There's no way hell you could shame a man into doing this shit because it's not his bag. This is not what he signed up for all intents and purposes. I look at it like this. If you can't cut off your actual relationships with your exes, then there's a problem with that. There's an overall problem with that. And a man should never have to deal with your ex for all intents and purposes. This shit should always be handled properly and done properly. If it's not done properly, now he's got to deal with the drama, and he's got to deal with the drama of the fact that your ex-baby daddy want to fight him too for no fucking reason because he's just a new guy in your life. Nobody wants that stress in their life. And the sad part about that is that shows a lack of structure and responsibility taking when it comes to the women, for all intents and purposes, which is a big, huge problem. Which leads me to problem 7 with women. The fact that you had a child and you're not with the father of the child actually puts you in a certain light for the fact that you had a child, but you're not in a relationship with that child's father. Why? Red light goes off in a man's head. There's a problem with that for obvious reasons, for the fact that you can't tell me that all the stuff went bad when in fact the man's still in your life. Well, okay, so if it went bad and he was abusive, then why does the court allow him to come back and pick up his children every so often? And why the hell isn't he paying for this shit? And I got to pay for all this shit. Like, and that's typically usually how it works. Like, their baby daddy basically get off scot free when you date a single mother. Like, he didn't, like, even if he was on child support, she'll never take him to court because she got you around and you're paying all this shit plus the shit that he's supposed to be paying on top of this shit for all intents and purposes. So that right there within itself is a burden and a half for the fact that if you have a baby daddy, he should be paying for some of this shit. This nigga need to break bread on this shit. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but this nigga need to start breaking bread. I don't give a damn. And the sad part about that is they don't normally make. What's up? I used to see you here, Israel. You're not. That's something that they're not used to actually seeing when it comes to single mothers. I mean, that's something that men don't want to deal with when it comes to single mothers. That single mothers always have going around them or revolving around them for all intents and purposes is the fact that the baby daddy's always off the hook when it comes to paying some shit. Like, you know, he could be in arrears for child support for years, decades, whatever, but she ain't trying to take him to court because she got your ass now, and you can pay for every damn thing, and he could just pretty much walk through life without pitching in on any of his children for all intents and purposes. He could pick them up, drop them off, not have to pay for any of the shit. Like, think about that shit. And the sad part about that is a lot of times when you're dating a single mother, if the father needs money, 9 times out of 10, she's probably going to bum it off you to give to him. That's another problem that you'll run into with single mothers, a lot of single mothers, especially if he's not paying child support and he's a bum ass nigga. That's typically how that's going to work. She's going to borrow money from you to give money to him, which is problem 8. 8 part 1. 8 part 2 is another problem with single mothers is their baby daddy is still on their mind, like Israel said over here. Their baby daddy is always in their lives, and he's always got some funny relationship with you, despite the fact that we know he's your baby daddy, but you broke up with him for a reason. But he's always around, and he's always, he's always, he's always a little too close for comfort. But you say, oh, he's just a baby daddy. We're just friends. This, that, and the other. Which actually brings me to 8 part 3. Male friends revolving around single mothers. Why would a man want to have to put up with having all these other guys revolving around a mother when in fact you're supposed to be dating that man? For all intents and purposes, you got these men around for what reason? The sad part about that is women will always say they're friends, or they're their cousin, or they're their brother, or they're their this. Basically, they always try to paint them as some type of relative, or cousin, or brother, or nephew, or whatever the hell they're trying to paint them in the light as being. And the sad part about that is if you actually pay attention to those relationships those relationship dynamics. What's up, Sos? If you ever pay attention to the relationship dynamics, that looks awfully more like a West Virginia family for all intents and purposes. Looks like a West Virginia family where the brother and the sister are dating, or the cousins and the brother are dating, or the cousin and the father's dating, or the cousin and the uncle's dating, or it's just weird, very weird, those relationships, because they act very funny when they're actually in those relationships, and that's typically how a lot of the times those relationships go and work. The sad part about that is if you have too many male friends revolving around you, no man's going to want to deal with that shit. Because at the end of the day, what that lets a man know is 2 things. Basically the same thing that goes when you actually had children. You had children and you broke up with the baby daddy, or something happened with the baby daddy where you're no longer together. Bad decision-making skills is typically how men look at that. So you make poor decisions. Not only do you make poor decisions, you're very irresponsible, and there's a potential of a fuck up or a mistake that new man's going to be blamed for because you have too many male orbiters revolving around you for all intents and purposes, which is typically how that works. Or your baby daddy's still revolving around you, and y'all have this funny relationship where y'all are supposed to be, broken up, but he's hugging up on you and kissing up on you like y'all still in the fucking relationship, and you allow it to happen. This is typically a problem that a lot of men have with dating single mothers, because their father is always around, and there's always this weird relationship that y'all have with each other, despite the fact that y'all claim y'all are broken up. Sad part about that is 9 times out of 10, if a single father is still friends with if the father of the children is still friends with the mother of the children that you're dating, she's probably 9 times out of 10 she's fucking that guy. I hate to say it, but it is what it is. She's fucking him, or she's getting some type of pleasure out of him for all intents and purposes, non-monetary, obviously. She's getting some pleasure out of that guy for all intents and purposes, and that's typically how that works. So he's either eating her out, slinging her dick, or basically, having sex with her when you're not around. It's typically how that works. It's basically the same thing when it comes to women when they make you wait to have sex. The reason why she's making you wait is because she doesn't want to have sex with you. She wants to have sex with somebody else. She just wants you around for finances for all intents and purposes. That's typically how that works. Another reason why is if she's making you wait because, like I said, she doesn't want to have sex with you, and you're not her sexual type or her sexual preference. So if a woman's making you wait for sex, you're not her sexual type, nor your sexual preference. It's typically how that works. And the sad part about that is a lot of men get caught up in this whole entire thing and wonder what the hell's going on and wonder why this shit is actually unfolding in front of their eyes. This is why. You're not her sex. You're not her first sexual preference, or you're not her sexual type for all intents and purposes. The sad part about that is a woman would keep milking a man like that as long as she can milk him up until she actually has to give him sex. Then either A, she'll break up with him when she has to actually give him sex, or make up any excuse. She'll either A, break up with him if when the moment comes where she actually have to, she done exhausted everything, she actually have to give him sex, or she'll ghost him, or B, what she'll do is basically she'll give him lazy sex for all intents and purposes, or 3, she'll make up every excuse not to want to have sex with that man. She got a headache, the children got school in the morning, the children are sick, shit along the lines of that, basically, to basically make it sound like, it's a viable reason not to have sex. Typically the same shit that she did to actually lose her last significant other is the same shit she'll pull with you if she's only with you for finances and she's not really into you sexually for all intents and purposes. Because there's a lot of women that could date a man and not be sexually attracted to a man and take all his money and be banging somebody else behind your back. A shit ton of women can pull that shit off and do that shit. Women do that shit on a regular basis, matter of fact. Hell, why do you think women have this many friends around them? For this reason. They basically using one friend for fixing a car. They got another friend for fixing a house. They got another friend for dick, for D, the D guy that pretty much handles the D, that gives her the D. They got another guy for head that just eats her pussy out for the most part. And they got another guy because, he's the financial guy for all intents and purposes. And this is typically how this works. There's always going to be this many guys around a woman. So why do you even want to remotely sacrifice time, effort, and money on somebody that's always going to have somebody extra floating around her ass? Like, why would you want to invest money in that? Why would you want to drop money in a deficit? Basically, what I said at the beginning of this video is single mothers are a net deficit. Why would you want to throw money at a money pit? Or why would you want to throw money at something that you're not going to get any gratification out of, or do anything, or she's going to do anything for you in return? Or you don't even have a say in raising her children. You can't make suggestions and something that will possibly make her life easier as a single mother, because she'll make up every excuse for why she does it this way for all intents and purposes and not do it your way. Or she'll say she tried it, meanwhile she didn't try it, because you could tell she didn't try it because her children are bad as hell. Because if she'd have tried it, her children wouldn't be bad as hell. And typically a lot of women like that tend to, instead of actually talk to their children or get down to their children's level, they'll just hand them a popsicle or stick a fucking iPad in front of them to basically parent them. They'll parent them with a popsicle, or parent them with junk food, or parent them with a fucking iPad. It's typically how this stuff works. So this is the reason why their children are acting out. But the sad part about that, you're not allowed to say nothing about that, because this is how she does her job. Even if you have to babysit the child, you're not allowed to say nothing to the child, because the child would just go complain to his mother and she would yell at you. Even if the child was on a windowsill about to jump out the fucking window, and you said, no, you screamed at the child and you caught him from falling and breaking his fucking neck, she would still scream at you for screaming at the child, despite the fact that you just saved him from breaking his neck. This is typically how these relationships work. This is the reason why men don't want to get caught up with women, single mothers for all intents and purposes, for this fact, because at the end of the day, this is the shit you got to put up with. What's up, Shinobi Wan? This is the shit you actually got to put up with in a relationship. This is the shit that's always going to be revolving around you in a relationship. And the sad part about that is, when you start weighing a risk assessment analysis as a man, you tend to realize that you want to opt out. You want to pull the Mark Cuban and go, you know what? This is not for me. I'm out for all intents and purposes. You tend to pull a Mark Cuban on people for all intents and purposes in Shark Tank. And the sad part about that is, women get upset by men that do this and say, they'll make excuses and say, well, he's not man enough. No, you had too much shit going on around you that you're not willing to fix or correct or straighten out, that this man doesn't want to date you. This is typically all it really is. It'd be no different than dating a single mother. Would be no different than if you ask a woman, do you want to date this good looking guy? He has a six pack abs. He got a chiseled chin, and he got the jawline of a god, Greek god, and all this other great shit. But he's about $500,000 in debt. Do you think she's going to want to be with that guy that's $500,000 in debt? $500,000 in debt? She's not going to want to be with that guy. She'll opt out of that guy in a heartbeat. She'll opt out of that guy faster than Jeremy Meeks raised money, then females raise money and for Jeremy Meeks in jail to get bond, to get bail for all intents and purposes. The sad part about that is women won't even remotely go near that relationship, no matter how good he looks, no matter if he has a chiseled jaw, chiseled chin of a god, a Greek god, and he has the body of a god, and he looks good, and he got the six-pack abs, and he got all this shit going for him. A woman will opt out of that in a heartbeat if he's $500,000 in debt. That's typically what dating a single mother is. That's typically what dating a single mother is to a woman, to a man. That's typically what dating a single mother looks like to a man. $5,000 in debt. Why would you want to put yourself $5,000 in debt? Because the sad part about that is it may not necessarily be $5,000 in debt. The fact of the matter is, if you factor in the time that he's got to put in, and the time that he's not going to get back, the money he's going to put in, the money he's definitely not going to get back, all the time that he took building a bond with your child, that if you break up, he's not going to get any of that shit back. So, in all technicality, why put in this effort for something that's not worth the squeeze? Well, it's kind of like the saying, if the juice is not worth the squeeze. It's typically what it is when it comes to a single mother. Dating a single mother, like I said, it would be like you trying to offer a single woman, a single mother, a guy who's $500,000 in debt. She's not going to want to date that guy at $500,000 in debt because that's a lot of money that's not going her way or her children's way. Because at the end of the day, it don't matter how many women will get on here and say, I would date him. No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't date him because he's $500,000 in debt. That's a fucking house and a half, depending on where you live, or a whole entire house, or a half a house if you live in California, a whole entire house if you live in Georgia, a house and a half if you live in like Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, places like that for all intents and purposes. That's like a house and a half if you live in those places. And the sad part about that is no woman is willing to actually date somebody that's $500,000 in debt. So why would a man want to date a woman who's a net deficit when it comes to having children? Because at the end of the day, once you tally all this stuff up, he's not going to have the time with you because he's not going to be of any importance to you because he's not even going to remotely get a rank in your whole entire ranking system, nor is he going to be a part of your hierarchy. He's just going to be something off in the corner, like an ATM that you can access anytime for your fun or for your financial purposes. That's typically all a man is in a relationship with a single mother. He's only there for her fun and her pleasure when she needs it, and her financial fun and pleasure for all intents and purposes. So he's basically that's all a man is to a woman, a single mother in a relationship. He's nothing more than a fucking wallet, a secret stash of money, and a secret stash of really, really good dildos in a corner some damn where at a house, in a dark room, in a box. Is typically all a man is to a woman that's a single mother. He's of no importance to her. He would never be of any importance to her besides finance and whenever she wants to get her rocks off, because he's not going to be able to get her rocks off regularly with her. Because the sad part about that is, if you're dating a single mother, you're probably going to have sex less than you would if you were married to the woman for all intents and purposes. It's typically how it works. You're probably going to have less sex with her than her ex-baby daddy had with her for all intents and purposes. It's typically how that's going to work. And what I mean by that is because usually single mothers don't want to lock their doors and their children always come busting in a room, or their children always got to want to stick their fingers under the damn door and act simple and shit like that. And that's going to ruin the mood. So you're never going to have sex for the fact that you're going to have that child out there that always conveniently, that's up and conveniently needs water, or, doesn't feel well, or, it's funny how children don't feel well. They were perfectly fine at the beginning of the day, but all of a sudden now they don't feel well. And, as long as you're there, they don't feel well. But as soon as you leave, they feel better now. It's typically how this works. And this is a neat thing about children when it comes to single mothers, because they'll basically pry you away from their mother for all intents and purposes. Because the sad part about that, it's not only the baby daddy working against you, it's the child working against you in those relationships too. Because the child doesn't want his daddy, his or her daddy replaced by you. So the child's always going to work against you in a relationship, which makes for reason 9 not to date single mothers. The child always works against you in a relationship. No matter what you do, even if it's good, it's always your fault and you did something wrong. Especially if the child starts crying. Hell, you can go buy the child a PlayStation 6. I know it's not out yet, but I'm just basically giving you a fucking general premise on this shit. You go buy a child a PlayStation 6. If he can have the very first PlayStation 6 before anybody else gets the PlayStation 6, and this child can throw a fit and it would be your fault, and the mother would pretty much shun you, yell at you, and do everything, and pretty much berate you for all intents and purposes, despite the fact that you didn't do anything. All because you didn't hook it up fast enough for the child. So now you're in trouble with the mother because you didn't hook it up fast enough for this damn brat. It's typically how that works. And the sad part about that is that's another tactic that children use to pretty much pry new men away from their mothers. And this is typically why men don't want to deal with single mothers for this reason, because all these children have this entitlement issue where they feel as though that they have this right to pretty much do anything they want and mess up, time time that you actually need, quality time that you actually need in a relationship to actually build a successful relationship. But the sad part about that is neither the mother or the baby daddy or the child wants you to build that quality time. You're not there for that quality time. You're basically there as the wallet, and whenever she needs to get her rocks off, if she's not already banging, the guy who's fixing her car, or the guy who's fixing her sink, or her baby daddy for all intents and purposes, or her coworker. So you're basically there as a backup dildo and pretty much a wallet to finance every fucking thing. That's all you are in a relationship with a single mother. That's all you will ever be in a relationship with a single mother. This is typically how this works, and this is pretty much where you'll be relegated to. You won't have a place in a hierarchy. You're pretty much not placed anywhere in a hierarchy. There could be 4 things in a hierarchy. It could be her 2 children, and a dog, and you would never even get a place. So she would be first place. One of her children would be first and second place, and her dog would be, third and fourth, second and third place. Her dog would be 4th place, and you get no rank. You're basically just there. You're just there. You're not even 5th place. You're not 6th place. You're not 10th place. You're no place for all intents and purposes, which means you have no place being in that relationship. If you're not placed anywhere in the hierarchy, you have no place being in that relationship for all intents and purposes. It's typically what I want to say about that. And the sad part about that is a lot of men will always sit there. There's a lot of simp-ass men that will sit there and throw themselves into the fire for all intents and purposes. And the sad part about that is those simp men or those beta orbiters or those cuck men are the same men who get used and taken to the cleaners on a regular basis by women because they believe this is how the world's supposed to work. It's sad, but it's true. But I done drug this on long enough. Thank y'all for showing up. Thank you for joining the podcast of Single Mothers versus the Dating Market. There's probably going to be a part 2 to this when I actually explain the actual dating market and why women run into problems in the dating market. Like on the opposite side, not just relationship side or the behavior. I'm not going to talk about the behavioral side of the things. I'm going to talk about the actual problems they actually run into in a dating market that gives them a problem or stonewalls them in a dating market or sandbags them in a dating market for all intents and purposes. So that one will probably come out in probably either sometime the end of this week or sometime this week or next week. Y'all be good to yourselves. Stay MGTOW, stay red pill. Be blessed. Take care of yourselves. Treat yourselves like milk. Do not spoil yourselves. Always improve yourself and always improve upon yourself and always be willing to help others to improve upon themselves. Be blessed. Stay good to yourselves. See you, man. Adios, my niggas.